Well, if it wasn't already apparent that we are paying the price for a big Australia, a new report has highlighted just how much we're lagging behind when it comes to infrastructure keeping pace with immigration, in particular housing. New data by the Institute of Public Affairs shows over the past financial year, there were fewer than 149,000 new dwellings, despite 530,000 arrivals. Now, if we work off the assumption that roughly each new dwelling is occupied by 2.5 people, there is still a shortfall of just under 63,000 homes. Joining me now to discuss this is the Executive Director at the Institute of Public Affairs, Scott Hargreaves. Scott, thanks for joining us on the program. We know the federal government has control of the migration levels, but at every state level, there is a shortfall in housing. So who is to blame here?
Well, it is about supply and demand, and when it comes to the restrictions on housing supply, our inability as a nation to deliver housing at anything like the rate we need, all levels of government are to blame. There's no doubt about that. The IPA forecasts that the shortfall over the 5 years to 2028 is something like 250,000 homes. But when it comes to the demand side, the migration levels, that is solely the preserve of the federal government. And what we're seeing now is virtually an out-of-control migration program. When we're putting the brakes on building houses, the federal government is putting the accelerator on the program to bring in new arrivals at a rate that we just cannot cope with. And that's why Australians are getting very worried about this program, and even have said in a survey that we conducted that 60% of Australians would rather see a pause in the program until we could get the housing infrastructure flowing at the rate that it should.
Well, and this is the problem, isn't it? Because the current number is unsustainable. Australia welcomed something along the lines of 2,000 migrants a day in the year to September last year. That's an extraordinary figure, despite Albo telling us that he's actually got to bring the numbers down. But debate on the matter is stifled. Politicians don't want to be seen as being racist, but clearly we're crying out for serious policy on this.
It is time for people to speak up. Perhaps they have been concerned about being racist. Perhaps there's been too many voices from short-term thinkers in the business community who just want to see more and bigger numbers, economists who want to see the GDP figures pumped up. But some people are speaking up. We've seen Dan Tehan in the coalition is speaking up, other politicians in the federal parliament. And you need to be brave enough just to call it out and not be fearful of being called racist simply because you're saying this migration program is beyond any level that we've seen in Australia in any comparable period, and it's out of control, and it's time something was done.
Absolutely. And you mentioned a shortfall of about 250,000 homes, which is an astonishing figure. And we know that Labor's goal is to build 1.2 million homes in the next 5 years. That's already been labelled a fantasy by building groups. We'll actually be lucky to get 100,000 new builds this year alone. But even if Labor could reach its goal, Scott, would it even scratch the surface given the current immigration numbers? Well,
I don't think we should lose the point that that is a goal that is absolutely unachievable. It's almost a Soviet-style idea where you simply increase the target, but you've got exactly the same policies in place, the exact same restrictions on housing supply. You're making life harder for builders. Builders are going bankrupt in this country. This is not an environment where you're going to see the sort of investment that we need. The number of new dwelling approvals for private in the private sector is under 100,000 for the first time since 2013. Things are actually getting worse, not better. So it's very much a hypothetical number, I'm afraid.
Well, that's it. I mean, houses are not being built. That's what the latest figures show us. And if you're a young person, for example, or someone looking to break into the housing market, Scott, this data really doesn't fill you with much hope.
Well, the great thing about young people is they should always have hope. Keep working hard, keep saving. If you're renting, that's okay, but don't back politicians who are going to give you short-term solutions. Otherwise, you'll be renting for your entire life. You'll have your money tied up in a super fund. You'll be living in a big apartment complex owned by the super fund that's sitting on the money that you've contributed. What we need is longer-term policies that can get Australians into homes that can let them access their super for deposits, let them take control of their own lives, form families, enjoy the Australian way of life. So I would say to young Australians, hang on to that hope, do what you can, and also start making politicians accountable, because they're the ones that are making sure that you haven't been able to afford a home, and there's no reason why that needs to be the case.
Yeah, spot on. That's really, really good advice, Scott. Overall, though, how much more can the government keep hiding behind its immigration data? We know that immigration is currently helping prop up areas of this economy. It's been labelled a Ponzi scheme, but realistically, without it, Australia would be in a recession. How long can we hide behind it?
Well, I think this is where the federal government just needs to start getting honest with Australians. They need to be honest that they've lost control of the migration program, and they also need to be honest that for the average Australian, we're already in a recession. What we've got is a per capita recession for 4 quarters in a row for an entire year. On the per capita figures for GDP actually went backwards. So the federal government has to be honest. If they're just going to say we're pursuing immigration solely so that we can brag about the top line GDP growth numbers, so that we can go off to Davos or the UN or whatever and say, look at our economic growth numbers. If that's what they want to do, they need to be honest about that, because it's disguising the recession, which is the lived experience of the average Australian.
Absolutely. As I said, it's been labelled really just as a Ponzi scheme. Scott Hargreaves, we have to leave it there. Really appreciate you joining us. Thank you.